Boy, the Duke Blue Devils suffered a scare in the ACC tournament. You never want to see something like that happening to Cooper Flagg. What happens next?
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers, and thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert. On this episode, we'll talk about a warning that Paul Finebaum has issued to the ACC, and also a reasonable explanation as to why the ACC would settle with Florida State and Clemson the way that they just did. We'll talk about what I feel, maybe Kenton disagrees, but what I feel to be a pretty brilliant proposal for future formatting of ACC basketball. But Kenton, let's start with the Duke Blue Devils. And regardless of not having Cooper Flagg available for the majority of the game, including the entire second half, they were still able to beat Georgia Tech because Duke, of course, is a really good roster outside of their future number one overall draft pick in Cooper Flagg. But boy, everybody holding their breath. Cooper Flagg goes up for that rebound. His legs, his ankles are literally about 5-6 feet off the ground. And he comes down on the side of his foot, the outside, with the left ankle completely turned inward. I'll admit, Kenton, when I saw, like, in live time, the impact, and I'm watching the replay, I thought he might have a broken ankle. Like, that was my reaction. And then to add to the drama, Flagg is taken off the court in a wheelchair. He's taken for x-rays. But then in the second half, we see him back out on the bench with his teammates. Didn't play again, of course, but no boot on. He's standing up, cheering for his teammates. So you feel like disaster was averted today, but every Duke Blue Devil fan in America, in the world, was holding their breath for a little bit there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That was a very concerning moment. And the irony of us talking about on the squad yesterday, like, oh, nobody rests their players during conference tournaments. And then we see this happen. But in all seriousness, we're glad that he's okay. And me and Donno disagree here slightly because I don't think it was drama to put him in a wheelchair. I think it was a precaution. And I would rather have you not putting pressure on something that could be bad than being like, hey, put pressure on it and we'll figure out on the back end if it's broken or if it's a tear or if it's a high-grade sprain or if it's a low-grade. I'd much rather say, hey, we're going to wheel you out. No big deal. If it's nothing, it's nothing. We're all right. Than to have you out here, gamping and walking on something that you've just made worse in a few steps that you could have potentially been a guy that was going to lead us to a national championship later on down the road. So, we're glad that Cooper Flagg is okay because, like we have said multiple times this year, Duke appears to be our best shot at winning a natty. That's just what they appear to be. So, we're glad that he's okay. I'd be surprised if I saw him play again in the ACC tournament, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's and by the way, I have to share this because the internet remains undefeated as you see this X post from Richie Gordon. Cooper Flagg when Duke matches up against UNC again. It's the old. I'm an old school pro wrestling fan. You got Kevin Nash in the wheelchair. Looks like he's got his leg in a cast, and then boom, he's up. He's up. That'll be Cooper Flagg the next opportunity to take on to take on UNC if they get that. We're watching the UNC game, by the way, is on for us live while we're recording this. They're up 4 against Wake Forest in the late stages. But yeah, I mean, well, on what we know about Flagg's ankle, by the way, John Shire confirmed after the win against Georgia Tech that there's no structural damage, that the x-rays came back negative. But like you said, there's really no reason to risk him the rest of the ACC tournament. Let Flagg get rested up for the big dance. Duke, regardless, is likely secured. And listen, they could still win the ACC tournament without him. They're not winning the NCAA tournament without him. They could still win the ACC tournament without Cooper Flagg. Duke is that good. But get him rested and ready to go for the NCAA tourney, because absolutely, KG, if we're looking at the ACC to possibly win a national title this year, Duke is by far the best chance to do that. They're likely to be a second overall seed, only behind Auburn. And, if Duke got the opportunity to play Auburn in the tournament, I wouldn't mind Duke's chances one bit, because they have the horses to do it. So do not risk Flagg the rest of the way.
And you got to think about it like this. You could potentially play him in the way that the bracket is shaping up. You're not playing any bad teams from here on out. I think that all of the bad teams are at home now. So what does that mean going forward? What you're looking at here is, okay, so if Duke is going forward in the tournament, which they are, you're going to play better teams, and you could potentially play your rival UNC. Why would you want his ankle exposed to that, as opposed to, we're going to rest you, and your get-right game, your get-back game, where you need to get back in rhythm, we're going to put you up against the 16 seed. We're going to put you up against a team that, in the olden days, they might not even be here. Go ahead and get right against them, and then from there, we'll figure it out. Go the rest of the way and do all the things. But you don't want that, as opposed to he goes up and Victor Locken lands on his leg in the ACC championship or something along those lines. You just don't want to see that.
Yeah, no, well said. We've talked a lot this season about why, the ACC, why they can't get more respect. Like, hopefully the ACC gets 4 teams into the NCAA tournament. They might only get 3 in. It's been dwindling in recent years. The head coach of Stanford made what I think is kind of a brilliant proposal about how the ACC can improve their strength of schedule moving forward and hopefully put more teams consistently into the NCAA tournament. We'll talk about that and more. Kenton Gibbs of Locked On Wolfpack. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. We keep going here. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. Keep it locked. And I already know, my friends, that you're keeping it locked to Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? We've all been there. Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and I save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you could use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use Locked On College. That's code Locked On College at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code Locked On College for half off your first year. We're also proudly brought to you by Factor. Oh, I've been achieving so many goals thanks to Factor. If you're looking to optimize your nutrition this year, Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's calorie smart, protein plus, or keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfast, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. I love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning. I've tried the Protein Plus. I'm going to try the Calorie Smart next. And they were packed. They're always packed with flavor. They keep me full throughout the day, which is great. The convenience is unbeatable. No prep, no mess, just great food in minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50off and use code LockedOnCollege50off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code LockedOnCollege50off at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50off. Thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. For your next listen, make sure you check out our other shows. Kenton Gibbs and Grayson Boone do a really good job on Locked On Wolfpack, covering all things NC State. I host Locked On Canes, covering all things Miami. For Miami, I think I'll have another episode later tonight because it looks like Miami's getting a new recruiting commit. And for you guys, Kenton, on Locked On ACC or Locked On Wolfpack, how are things going on the Will Wade front? Is that looking more likely? Is there progress being made there for your next basketball coach?
I cannot say anything. I don't know anything, but I will say, Wolfpack Nation, let's ride. That's what I'll say. I'll say there should be some excitement building here. And the last thing I will say is this. The fact of the matter in this coaching search, Wolfpack Nation will either go into the depths of despair that I have never seen in my life, or literally you will be able to hear I'm walking on sunshine all the way up from Roanoke, Virginia, the way they're going to be blasting out the speakers in Raleigh.
Oh, man. Phenomenal. How do you like this idea, Kenton? And, when I'm really glad that Stanford is in the ACC because you got some smart folks over there in Northern California, including Stanford head basketball coach Kyle Smith, who offered a plan to improve the ACC's net ranking for future years. Something he has mentioned, he said, to Commissioner Jim Phillips. So he has proposed this idea to the commission. So Kyle Smith has proposed for ACC basketball 2 divisions, but it's not, we're not bringing back the Coastal and the Atlantic. He's proposing 2 divisions where there's a top tier and a second tier based on a rolling 5-year average. Top tier teams would play each other twice a year, helping their net. Second tier teams would play each other twice a year, helping them build. He said, I've talked to Jim about relegation. So this might be my moment, trying to go 2 divisions. So you'd have a top play a top. They'll probably be mad, and I mentioned that, but I do think that would give you more opportunities if you played everyone twice in the top division, champions and Premier League. I've been working on this, he says. So based on, you would have 2 divisions, and then at the end of the year, you'd relegate someone, but that top division would play each other twice. So you get more quad ones, and it would be pretty neat. So maybe it's because I'm a lifelong soccer fan where I think this sounds like a pretty brilliant idea. But how do you feel, Kenton? Are there drawbacks, or are you on board with Kyle Smith?
Oh, I'm wholly on board with it. I think that this is beyond intelligent, especially because this is a little different from football. If you did this in football, you would be, again, working even harder to make the quote-unquote lesser teams lesser with an already uneven distribution in the TV money. However, basketball TV money doesn't factor in the same way. Nobody's basketball TV deal is that massive to where it's like, oh, based on your basketball viewership, you're going to get less or more money. So I absolutely agree with the potential system of relegation. And here's the biggest part about it. Here's the only part that would be difficult. As being a former college football player, I know how much goes into the operations side of the deal, right? By operations, I mean the people who plan out the hotels, the people who plan out the plane travel, all that type of stuff. Now, why am I saying what goes into it from that end? You would have to potentially adjust your scheduling if you are on that bubble of relegation. That's not something to scoff at. But even with that, these people are making hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like these are still jobs that, like, and I'm sorry to any operations person if you're not making $100,000 or more. I'm sorry, apologies, but you're making money to do a big kid job. So, like,
sure,
it's more work on you. No denying that, but do your job. I mean, that's the only drawback I could think of. But all in all, I love this plan. I absolutely love this plan. So our top teams no longer have to worry about, well, what if the teams that we played out of conference are bad now? Doesn't matter. You still get to play the top teams in the conference, period. And that should help you out.
I think, and I hear what you're saying about operations. I want to understand that a little bit more because the schedules don't come out that far in advance anyway, in terms of exactly when you're playing where. So I feel like there's a word. I may be wrong. I feel like there's.
You know what? You know what? You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Now that I think about it, you're right. You're very correct in that regard. So even if you know who you're playing, you don't know exactly when you have to travel there. Yeah, exactly. You don't know when you have to travel and where. So actually, now that I think about it, I really can't think of a serious drawback to this. Again, it's not,
Yeah.
I can understand if we're talking football where the ratings matter to a degree, where it's like, hey, if you get cut out of that tier where you don't get Florida State, you don't get Clemson, you don't get UNC, you don't get any of Miami, you don't get Georgia Tech, you don't get any big viewers, it de facto like puts you behind the 8 ball. Or if one of those teams or two of those teams end up in relegation, you know, it's like oh, well, guess what? All these teams down low just got an instant bump. I get that. And I get that you don't want that much of a mercurial situation in terms of the metrics that matter to NC or to your chosen institution getting tens of millions of dollars. But with basketball, it's different. I can't see a drawback to it. And also, I think that's a fun storyline, right? Like, who's facing relegation? And like, if you win the conference championship, even if you were slated to get relegated, you instantly get bumped up to number 1 and stuff like that. I think that'd be great.
Now, I'm trying to play devil's advocate because I'll say I like this idea a lot. And I think it's something, you know, I'm glad Smith said he talked to Jim Phillips about it. I hope Phillips is seriously considering it and, you know, getting a team on this to kind of explore the feasibility. But if I am going to play devil's advocate, I think here's a potential drawback. If you're in the bottom tier, the bottom division, the one concern that I have, given that we're talking about college basketball, where this day and age, if you have one stellar transfer portal, one stellar recruiting class, let's say you're in the bottom tier because you haven't been good for the better part of the last 5 years, but you just kill it in the transfer portal and you've got suddenly a top tier team, but you're playing in the bottom tier division. And because Kyle Smith has created this system where, you know, the top tier teams are playing each other and the bottom tier teams are playing each other more, then all of a sudden, like, you're a really good team this year, but you're in the bottom tier because what you did the last 5 years, and you don't have the opportunity to get quad 1 wins because you're in that bottom tier division. So that to me would be one of the obstacles that, you know, what if you do have kind of a Cinderella type of offseason and, you know, because, you know, at NC State, of course, had a tough year, but they just had a surprising Final Four run last year. You know, you can turn around your basketball team pretty quickly this day and age. So then if you're stuck in that second tier, I think that could hurt you a little bit where, you know, Kyle Smith has created this idea where it's going to take you kind of a couple years to work your way back into the top tier. But what if your team goes from really bad to really good in one off season? Because that can happen in that sport.
But I think that they're helped out more than the teams who are really good one year and bad the next are hurt. If you think about it, right? And you talk about a team that was dominant, great, whatever, and then they have like a mass exodus, or they get their coach leaves, or, you know, they had a couple one and dones that all leave, and you didn't reload upon that the next year. You're stuck in the top division with the best teams, and you no longer have the talent to justify being there. If I'm in that lower division, I'm good. Let me swat around these bozos. Let me get a bunch of 15, 20-point wins off these clowns. And the middle of the pack and lower tier teams that are in the upper one, they would have more room to complain than anybody because that screws their conference tournament seeding. Because they're like, oh my God, we got whooped on by these teams that are the best in the conference. We had a young team and it took them too long to figure it out. They figured it out late. And now we're a 12 seed, barely making it in, having to win 5 games in 5 days, when under the traditional model, we might have been a 6 or 7 seed who got at least one bye. So, you know, I think that if anybody has a complaint, it's not the teams that got good overnight. That's the team, to me, that would benefit the most from this type of situation.
Yeah, no, that's fair. We'll go back to football, primarily football, although this pertains to every ACC sport. Paul Finebaum has issued a warning to the Atlantic Coast Conference and a possible explanation as to why the ACC settled with Florida State and Clemson the way that they did. You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. My friends, it is tax season, and this is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and worrying and wondering if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. an expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no worrying, no wondering. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Thank you for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts, free on YouTube. For your next listen, check out Isaac Shade and Andy Patton on Locked On College Basketball. We've been rolling through this ACC tournament. By the way, North Carolina, you probably already know this if you're watching this episode, but North Carolina did get past Wake Forest, so we'll see if Cooper Flagg rises out of the grave like the Undertaker and plays against the Tar Heels. I would sit him for the rest of the tournament, though. That's probably what John Shire is. The rest of the ACC tournament, I should say, is probably what John Shire is going to do there. But Andy Patton and Isaac Shade will have you ready to fill out your brackets with confidence when you watch and listen to Locked On College Basketball. So Paul Finebaum, ESPN, ACC network personality, he said something interesting, Kenton, because you asked this question a lot last week. Why exactly did the ACC agree to settlement terms that seemed very favorable to Florida State and Clemson? Like really kind of thinking about the short term, not thinking about the long term. And Paul Finebaum addressed that and also offered a warning to the ACC. He said, if you're the commissioner of the ACC, you have to live in the moment. You plan for the future, but you can't be too hung up on 5, 6, 7 years from now because there's a chance you won't be the commissioner, he said on WJOX radio. He, being Jim Phillips, made the best deal for the moment. He had to stop the hammer. He had to stop the bleeding. He did that, but there is a due date. When that due date comes, it's going to be open season, I believe, on the ACC. And Kenton, that due date is going to be right around 2031. But here's my takeaway from the Finebaum comment, right? Basically saying that, hey, like Jim Phillips may not be and doesn't have to be the ACC commissioner 6, 7, 8 years down the road, but he's the ACC commissioner right now. But maybe it's incentive for him to strike a deal that creates harmony in the short term, because that's what you have to address first, even if there is more chaos 5, 6 years down the road. That's what I took Finebaum's comment to mean. And it kind of makes sense why, Phillips wouldn't want to be, working in an environment when multiple schools are suing him right now. At least put the lawsuits behind you for as long as you possibly can.
Maybe the place that I grew up at ain't the best. I'm from the west side of Detroit, Michigan, but where I'm from, when you start that fight, you don't leave till it's finished. And this explanation was a very poor one from Paul Finebaum. What do you mean? Oh, you got to figure out the short term first before you get to the long. I'm not trying to hear that nonsense. The ACC should have dug their heels in and fought with everything they had to say, you know what? If you all are to leave in 2-3 years, we will live with that. At the conclusion of these court cases, we will live with that. But what we will walk away from this with, if we walk away from that in 2-3 years with nothing, that's a possibility that would hurt us deeply. However, what we've given ourselves now is short-term stability, sure, but at the end of that short-term stability, you're cooked. You're done. Yeah. There's nothing incentivizing these teams to stay here unless somebody, and I'm not going to say any team names here, but one of these teams who everybody's talking about is leaving may be smart enough to look around and say, now, wait a minute. What if we aren't as big of a draw in the SEC? What if we go to the Big Ten and we find out, oh boy, it really is a different ball game, and we end up perennially the 9th, 10th, even lower best team there, as opposed to be, and I get it. Everybody's going to say, oh, that couldn't happen to my team. My team couldn't possibly end up relegated to mediocrity for a decently long period of time. I will tell all of you, look within. It was not too recent. I mean, it was not too distant for almost every program that's talking about leaving, where you were very, if not worse. So, it's one of those things where, again, if I am going to believe that this made sense for the ACC, I have to believe that ESPN applied pressure in some way, because without that, this just looks like cowardice and foolishness. It looks like recklessness. It looks like uselessness. That's what this looks like.
No, I'm with you on that. And I have to wonder, because we talk about these changes being 5-6 years down the road. But here's the thing: if you have teams that are potentially going to leave the ACC in 2031, that's not suddenly going to come up in 2031. We're going to start hearing about this 2-3 years before. I mean, that's what happened with Oklahoma and Texas. I mean, at the time when they declared they were going to leave and join the SEC, weren't they in the Big 12 for another 2 seasons, another 3 seasons after that? So that was a slow burn. So it's really not as if you've created harmony for the next 6 years. Like, you might have created harmony maybe for 3 years, because there's going to be a buildup before these teams leave.
The only difference is that Texas and Oklahoma left when the TV deal was expired, so they didn't have to pay a dime. That's literally the only difference. But we're pretty much in the same position, and that's the one thing that Doug Rohan said when he was here that I vehemently disagree with. That the ACC would be much more like the American Conference than what the Big 12 is right now. The Big 12 is pretty much exactly what's going to happen to the ACC here, because, again, who are their heavy hitters as compared to who are ours without Florida State, Clemson, right? Even if you say Florida State, Clemson, Miami, sure. Who are the heavy hitters over there compared to our heavy hitters, and see, like, and granted,
Deion Sanders, like, I can't even say that, like, it's not Colorado that's the heavy hitter. It's the coach who's the heavy hitter of that conference for however much longer he's there. I mean, Arizona State just won the Big 12. Utah was, kind of viewed as the heavy hitter when they added them. But yeah, your point is very much taken.
And if an Under Armour school is your heavy hitter brand in the year of our Lord and Savior 2025, with all the respect to Kevin Plank, actually, he's a Maryland grad, with no due respect to Kevin Plank and Under Armour, if your heavy hitter is an Under Armour school in 2025, you don't have a heavy hitter. So, I think that the ACC is going to look much more like that than a completely dilapidated, like, you've got nothing here. Old Dominion will be one of your best schools. It's not going to be that.
Well, we appreciate everyone's time as always. Make sure you hit that thumbs up, subscribe to Locked On ACC on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey app, wherever you get your pods. Subscribe on YouTube, and we'll talk to you guys again next time on another episode of Locked On ACC. He is Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes, and we'll see you next time right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.